a minute or two after 6. We want to be respectful of people's time. And so we certainly want to get the ball rolling on time. I see that both of our guests for this evening, is already here. Professor Rosalie Hamilton and Professor James, both of whom are already here. And we're giving a couple more persons some time to come. But while they come, let me just say that we have been very happy at the response to an interest to this course that we've been having. It's the Deepening Democracy course. We started it around 3 months ago, and we've had a couple of iterations. I must tell you that and Jeanette Calder, who is also on the call, had said this in one of her sessions, that you'll start to listen to the news differently. You'll start to have conversations differently as it relates to having more knowledge about the Constitution and more knowledge about just how we think about our country. When you hear some utterances on television, when you see some things happening, you'll think about it a little bit differently. And I must tell you that over the last couple of months, there have been some utterances that I've had to pause and say, maybe there's another way we could go about doing that. And one such utterance was there was a minister who went to visit a particular community, and he promised them that he will be back with a solution for them. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe that solution ought to be out of a dialogue with the community, and then you can have that kind of exchange to see just how best to achieve some of that community dialogue. So I'm very happy personally for a course like this being led by Professor Rosalie Hamilton. And I know those persons who are on the call who were a part of the first iteration also saw that it was useful. So I'm going to start this first part of the uh, session, and we want to get to the real meat of the matter. So we'll only take up like the first 10 minutes or so. Again, just to give more persons enough time to come so that everybody's here for the deep dive with Prof. Hamilton and Professor James. But I want to just talk a little bit about why the course was developed, why the Institute of Law and Economics decided that, we should embark on a course like this. And the first one was really the pilot. We've done some tweaking and some changes, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in a little bit when Professor Hamilton comes on. But we wanted to just do a quick jog down memory lane so that everybody could appreciate where it is that we are coming from and why we wanted to do a program like this. So really and truly, the overview, the target group that we have is young professionals. Particularly, we do a lot of training in terms of the legal professions here at the Institute of Law and Economics. So we wanted to do a focus on some of our young lawyers, some of our paralegals, and general young professionals to get their heads wrapped around and this idea of democracy and what does that mean in the context of Jamaica and where it is that we're heading. We also wanted to make sure that our advocates are also involved in this conversation. Community leaders, church leaders are some of the persons who we wanted to be involved in a course like this. In the first iteration, in this second iteration that we're going to talk a little bit about, and then also in future iterations as well. And it's set up as a trainer of trainer so that we can impart some knowledge and excite persons, and then they can then in turn organize some of those discussions with their with persons in their communities. So the two main objectives that we have for this course is to share basic information and deepen understanding of Jamaica's emerging democracy, focusing on citizens' participation, a big part of the conversation. I think that's an underlying theme in every module that we have: citizens' engagement, citizens' participation, good governance, and then, of course, constitutional reform to achieve desired social and economic objectives in the new Jamaica Republic. The second thing that we wanted to also do, and to some degree, we were able to do some of that in the last iteration. Provide teaching tools and simplified approaches and materials to enable at least 50 persons to effectively share basic information with others. We are hoping to reach 2,000. We learned some lessons from the first iteration, as I said, that was the pilot. So we'll know how best to do some of those community engagements going forward so that we can reach more persons with the message. We've changed a little bit, but these were the core modules: Introduction to Democracy and Development, Understanding Democracy, Government, Governance, and the Constitution, Constitutional Reform, and the Jamaican Republic. Those were some of the things that we went through in the last iteration. And before we bring Professor Hamilton in to talk a little bit about what round 2 is going to be looking like, let me invite Miss Judith Wedderburn, who was a participant in the course, to share her views quickly on what the course did for her and the organization that she's a part of. So Judith, I turn over to you. You were with me on camera up to this point. You've gone off camera now, so maybe you just want to touch back that button and be on camera with me as well. And so again, welcome and good evening to everyone. And we are getting some views from Ms. Judith Wedderburn, who was a part of the first cohort of this Deepening Democracy in Jamaica course that we had. Judith?
And do you need to stop sharing?
No, we can hear you. I can stop sharing. We can hear you. We're just not seeing you. There you go.
All right. Okay. So thank you so much, Dwayne, and of course to Prof. Hamilton and Prof. James. It's my pleasure to be here again. On reflection, I was very excited at the very beginning. I'm still excited, especially for the first 2 sessions, because I wanted a better understanding of this thing called the Jamaica Constitution. Like many people, you know a little bit about this, you know about some of the legislation which is grounded in the Constitution. But I was also aware that we're in a constitutional reform process. And for me, the essence of that process is to shape a democracy which leads us to development, to a kind of development which is equitable, a kind of development that is going to benefit citizens across Jamaica, regardless of race, class, gender, ability, disability, rural or urban, to benefit from what a constitution is supposed to offer its citizens. There are a couple of things that I'm still concerned about, but I am looking forward to this, to today's session, which I am confident will better explain, for me anyway, how we can really do our best to engage in a reform process which is democratic in itself, and therefore lay the foundation for guiding us, steering us towards a constitutional reform process which will do what it is supposed to do: engage as many people as possible, strengthen their own capacity to understand and desire to be a part of the process. To me, that's the only way I think we will really end up with a deeper, a better democracy, and a constitution which it is grounded in those 2 things: democracy and a process for everybody. So thank you so much, Dwayne and Prof, and I'm glad to be here again.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts, Judith. And I know if we open the mic to others who were here, we could go on for a little bit. We're going to take those later on, but I don't want us to lose persons before hearing from the conversation between Prof. Hamilton and Prof. James. And so I'm going to invite at this point Prof. Hamilton to jump on and just talk to us a little bit about what's in store for those persons who have already signed up and those persons who will sign up to be a part of cohort 2 of this training program. So Professor Hamilton, lovely to see you, and the floor is yours. Oh wait, we're not hearing you, Prof.
Right, forgot about that. Thank you, Dwayne. We were all excited about first cohort. We piloted this idea that there are Jamaicans who want to know more about the Constitution, want to know more about democracy. And we think that we bring a very unique perspective in this conversation because we're bringing a law and economic perspective, a legal and economic perspective on this whole constitutional discussion. So one of the first things we do in the course, and we'll repeat this round, is to discuss this idea of the relationship between democracy and development. There are lots of views out there about, whether one shapes the other. So we penetrate that conversation. And we do it also through the context of our own history. Very importantly, we don't get to a serious conversation about the Constitution unless we really begin to penetrate our own understanding of our journey. And Jeanette Calder, one of the presenters last time, is going to join us again, and she will take us through this journey to betterment, as she puts it. And so we'll have that kind of overview of the historical journey. And then we'll talk a little about our own journey with respect to the development issues and that experience post-independence. Now, we're going to take a little break. That week is a little difficult for some of us. So we're going to do a break, probably do a research assignment or tutorial or something. We'll fill you in on the details later there. But October 1st, we pick up the deepening our understanding of democracy and the roles and responsibility. Here again, we hope, Jeanette, I know you hadn't seen the time, but we'll work through the schedule and tweak it a bit to make sure that both yourself and Daniel Archer, who is also going to present some of the modules in this course, can do this session where we're getting into the weeds of this concept of democracy and republic, and then also importantly, highlighting roles and responsibilities. And we're talking about the responsibilities of government, both central and local, as well as the idea of a community government. Those are ideas floating around now, and those are issues that we want to talk about. And of course, the rights and responsibilities of you, all of us, the citizens of Jamaica. The third module, we go now more deeply into what exactly is the structure of government we're talking about. What do we actually have? And the concept of governance. We use the term sometimes interchangeably. So we penetrate that, and importantly, end up with a better idea of the strengths and weaknesses of both our current constitution and its implications for the structure of government. It will be a great opportunity for NIA to talk a little about the important work that NIA does with respect to integrity in governance. And so Daniel Archer will be involved in this session. And then we wrap up now, really taking a hard look at the constitutional reform issues that we think are important in shaping this new Jamaican Republic. And so we want to set ourselves in context of the Caribbean republics. We'll talk a little about, Guyana, Trinidad, Tobago, Suriname. All of these are republics, different kinds, different expressions. So we'll talk a little about that. And we will touch on that tonight in my conversation with Professor Vanus James as we penetrate what is currently happening in Trinidad and Tobago. And then we end our program, this entire course, on trying to come up with these key things that we think are important in this conversation of constitutional reform. Two necessary elements that we think are important: this idea of providing effective oversight of the executive and the importance of improving participatory democracy and strengthening the voice of people, individuals and communities. So that's in a nutshell what we're wanting to do. I hope that if you are interested, those of you who are on here for the first time hearing all of this, please register. And I know that Dwayne is going to put the links, if it's not there yet, in the chat, so you can register to be part of the program. And I'll pause at this time if we want any Q&As quickly, Dwayne. and then we move on to our conversation.
Yes.
Is there any cost associated with the modules and the course though?
Jeanette, go ahead.
Is there any cost associated with the course?
Dwayne?
Sure. Thanks for that one, Jeanette. At present, we are not charging for the course. However, you'll get a nice link that says if you want to continue to support efforts like these, then please donate using this link. We want to make it as accessible as possible, but there's a lot that goes on in the background. For instance, there are some face-to-face meetings that we'd want to have. Last time when we kicked off with a face-to-face meeting, and that was just phenomenal. When we had that exchange of ideas right there in the room, and persons are able to meet with each other. So we want to do some more of that. There are some community engagements that we also want to do as well, and all of that, will take some cash. So we're going to send it. Maybe you're connected to an organization who might be willing to support something like this, and so. No to the course, but we'll send a link so that you can give us some love if you're able to, nonetheless. So hopefully that answers the question, Jeanette. Prof?
And for those who've already benefited, you may want to give us a thank you by sending something. But let me say that we are leveraging our friends and supporters to provide some financial support. We've not gotten a lot, we've gotten some. And let me highlight the contribution of Spanish Court, Chris Issa, who was kind enough to lend us his facilities, and we have access to those facilities again. And so we're hoping that we can get other in-kind and cash support to make this a really exciting experience for all of us.
Great. Any other questions? We're at 6:20. We could take another 2 minutes worth of questions or comments that persons might have in relation to what you've heard so far before we jump into the main course for this evening discussion. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, Prof. I think it's over to you. We'll come back to the group in the end when we're doing some more of the question and answers coming out of the conversations that you're about to have, and then just general way forward. So it gives me great pleasure to turn over to yourself and Professor James.
Okay, thank you so much, Dwayne. And of course, no doubt you will directly communicate with persons who register, and we'll finalize the time and so on. So we'll all, if you're interested, please make sure to register. Okay, so, most of you perhaps here know Professor Vanus James, well-known economist across the region, doing a lot of work in econometric modeling of Caribbean development. Some of you may not know that he's also one of the founding members of the Institute of Law and Economics, and has been the inspiration and really the key thinker behind a lot of the legal and economic perspectives that we bring not just to the course, but to our own understanding of where we are in the development process in the Caribbean. Vanus is in the throes of the constitutional reform discussion taking place in Trinidad and Tobago, and he will give us his rich insight in terms of what's been happening there. And so we want to especially welcome Vanus to this forum. You're on with me? Yes. All right, great. So I want to just start contextually because, we've been talking about reforming the Constitution, as you know, Vanus, our 1962 Constitution for a long time. And we can identify the formal process of this discussion and this effort to reform the Constitution all the way back in 1977 with the establishment of the Constitutional Reform Division in the Ministry of Justice. And this led to this Joint Select Committee on Constitutional and Electoral Reform, which was a pivotal point in this move towards changing the Constitution. It was set up in 1991, and there was a final report tabled in Parliament in 1995. And apart from the major changes we made to Chapter 3 of the Constitution with respect to the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms in 2011, there's really been no major changes to our 1962 Constitution. And so in January 2022, right, the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs was established. And their mandate, as is reflected in the Constitution Reform Committee's TOR, was to give focused attention to the government's, and I'm going to quote here, legislative agenda and its legal and constitutional reform aspirations, and specifically to spearhead the most meaningful and comprehensive post-independence constitutional reform to be undertaken in Jamaica. And I like to talk about it that way because I think it's a significant statement in terms of the reform of our constitution since 1962. And so this is the context for our discussion in Jamaica. And of course, the Constitution Reform Committee was set up in March last year. And there is a discussion as to whether this move, this profound move, was triggered by Barbados' move to a republic in September 2020, or whether it was the advocacy pressures that was mounted when the Prince William and Kate came to Jamaica in March 2022. Whatever triggered this announcement, we were happy for it. And, our Prime Minister famously said, we're moving on. And we're now in the throes of our constitutional reform. So we felt that having you talk about what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago with respect to your own constitutional discussion would be very useful for us here in Jamaica. And so I want to start with that context. Like us, you have an order in council. Your constitution was essentially this legal document from Britain in 1962 as well. But I'd like you to describe for us your constitutional journey since, what really triggered this recent development last year in Trinidad and Tobago? Because we're aware that many changes have been made to your constitution, but what triggered it and what was your journey like?
All right, well, thanks a lot, first of all, for inviting me to the launch of your second tranche of courses, course content. And let me say thanks because it's always a pleasure to engage in any conversation about what a great society like Jamaica is trying to do. I am a firm believer in the fact that Jamaica is perhaps the most important society in the Caribbean, to say nothing of the world. So, okay, now where are we on constitutional reform and why are we where we are now? All right, well, in January, of course, as you pointed out, the government of Trinidad and Tobago took a decision to set up a committee to make proposals leading to constitutional reform via a national convention, so to say, that was intended to take place sometime in June. That has gone by without happening. So why did the government make that move? Well, in a way, you have to understand the journey from 1962. In 1962, after independence, we had one of the, in 1961 as well, we had maybe 1-2 of the biggest political meetings in opposition to Eric Williams and the PNM, led by the Democratic Labour Party back then. And that signaled to the country that there was deep-seated opposition to the direction in which the PNM was taking the country. Between 62 and 1970, oil prices collapsed and sugar prices collapsed. So the economy was in free fall, and young Black people in the PNM revolted against the conditions of their lives and blamed the problems of the society on the autocratic system of government, the authoritarian system of government that we were running under the PNM. And so in 1970, we launched what is called the February Revolution, in which young Black people in the society across the board, but primarily led by university students, many of whom, in fact, pretty much all of whom, had their parents as leading members of the PNM. Daga, Makandal Daga, for example, mother was one of the great stalwarts of the PNM out of the Laventil community. And we launched a series of matches across the country for what was described then as power to the people. That's not an accidental phrase. It points straight at the fact that the government is set up around the principle that cabinet runs the country with no oversight. That's the design of the parliament of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, when you think of the whole government. And it's designed pretty much of the government of pretty much all Caribbean islands, Caribbean countries, including Ghana and Suriname. Cabinet runs the country. And we rebelled against that. And in the process, of course, rebelled against the inherited racist, colorist structures, sociological structures, and created one of the most profound revolutions in that sense in the sociology of the country. But the business of reforming government was left untouched. The revolution was successful in some senses, but not in the sense of reshaping government. But Eric Williams responded to the demand for change and the massive revolution that was launched successfully by young people by putting together a commission under ex-Chief Justice Hugh Wooding. And Wooding looked at the issues along with a number of prominent Caribbean scholars known well in the Caribbean, Selwyn Ryan, Reginald Dumas, a number of very prominent scholars. And they came up with the fundamental idea that we should make progress by removing the British monarch as head of state and replace that monarch with our own, which is one of the things you are talking about in Jamaica. But we also had the idea in their report that we should reframe, restructure our Senate in particular, so that more of the senatorial design should reflect some sort of elected representative design. Eric Williams threw out all of those kinds of proposals and went with the recommendation that we should replace the head of state and put in the hands of our own head of state a couple of powers of appointment of important civil servants coming out of our commissions, various civil service commissions. And I think from there, with that half-done job, we've staggered from 76 to 1986 with swings in the economy that kept bringing up the issue of empowerment of the people. The revolution under NAR that replaced the PNM for the first time fully with a 33-3 vote, for example, kept the issue alive, and Robinson tried some things with his own effort at constitution reform. That didn't pan out too much in the form of real change. We came through that to the 1990 phenomena with Abu Bakr and the Muslim movement, pushing the same issue. People need to have a voice in what is going on. And they took arms and, of course, attacked the parliament, and we know what came of that. And I might remind you that in the case of the 1970 revolution, the military, young lieutenants in the military also joined the revolution. And we had the mutiny at Tetran. So the point is that we've come all that way into 2010 when Kamala and the ULF took over, the People's Partnership, as they call themselves in that agglomeration, took over and launched constitutional reform. And they went down the road of things like, how do you select the parliamentarians, proportional representation, and so on. But that did not touch the issue of a cabinet-dominated government. If you fast forward to 2021, in Tobago, when we launched an attack on the PNM again over this issue, the people of Tobago voted resoundingly 14-1 to remove the PNM from power on the promise that we would set up the government here in Tobago in a way that gives the people a voice. That was the reason people responded in that way. None of that has panned out. But in the process, the PNM lost control of the narrative. And what Rowley is doing in 2024, on the throes of another election coming forward, is to try and do something to reclaim the narrative on empowerment. He doesn't want to go into the next election without being able to say, we have tried, especially because the 2 seats in Tobago are important to him. We have tried to make proper progress on the matter of empowerment of the people. I think that's the fundamental logic behind Rowley's move. His efforts have not yet borne fruit when you look through the lens of the report that his team has prepared. But that's the pathway to where we are today.
Very interesting journey, to say the least. And so I think we have a better perspective as to why this happened last year. And like here in Jamaica, you have a National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform leading the process. We have a Constitutional Reform Committee. And when I looked at the report, and by the way, the report should be in the chat if you've not seen it. You can go online. I think it's available online as well. You could download it. But when I looked at it, one of the things that struck me was that your reform committee received submissions from the public like ours, but their committee received 816. I was struck by that number because our committee started a little earlier and you got 816 submissions that were emailed. We received 35. And so that's important to note. But significantly, there were 1,535 pertinent recommendations according to the report. And what struck me was that the report categorized these submissions, right, into 57 categories and then 5 broad themes. And importantly, it concluded that, and I'm going to quote here, the recommendations prioritize democratic participation and governance with a strong emphasis on reform in the electoral process and the institutions of subsequent management frameworks to achieve those objectives. Now, this idea that these submissions broken down into all of the pertinent recommendations, there are others that they treated as collateral and so on, that they perhaps didn't put a lot of weight on. All of that was done. My question really is, did the report finally and the committee prioritize democratic participation and governance as was implied in these submissions by the people?
Well, in name only, in terms of the promise, the statements made that the intention is to put we the people in charge. As you know, as a professor of law yourself, you would know that you can say things, but when you really want to know what's going on here, you have to go and look at the particular provisions that are there.
The details.
Yeah, your constitution offers the Jamaican people that the cabinet would be collectively accountable to the parliament. But when you look at the provisions in your constitution, nothing goes up. There are no mechanism at all by which the cabinet could be held accountable by the parliament. And the same is true in the provisions in this document put forward by my friends and colleagues in that committee. There are no provisions in the document that attack the central principle that cabinet runs the country. And even though they said they wanted to temper that with specific arrangements for oversight, if you look at the structure of the parliament they put forward, they've recommended an increase from where we are now, I think somewhere in 41 members to 59. But they want a cabinet of 18 members. If you have 59 in the total and 18 in the cabinet, there is no way you could set up systems of accountability. No way. In every case, the executive would continue to dominate the proceedings of the House of Representatives. And they also proposed a mixed design for the Senate with 40 elected members and 15 appointed members. We don't know what the Senate is responsible to do that would allow it to empower our people. But when you look, if you look at the rest of the world and you really understand what you're talking about when you're talking about empowerment of your people, you would know that an appointed Senate of any kind, whether in hybrid form or otherwise, cannot secure the fundamental rights of your people to equality of status and so on. You need to have an elected Senate across the board with a specific type of assignment to look after the equality of status principle. That's what you see in the US, that's what you see in Australia, and all of the places in the world where you have serious efforts to ensure a Senate can secure the rights of our people. And there's a third and final thing that is completely missing from the report that came out of our work here in Tobago. We submitted recommendations to this committee coming directly from the communities of Tobago. Tobago is not designed like Trinidad. Tobago is an island of communities. And the communities collectively said to us, go tell Dr. Rowley for us that we want government to be understood in terms of 3 layers, not 2. We want a central government, a Tobago House of Assembly, and local government in Trinidad. But we want government to also exist at the level of our communities, through which we could guarantee the rights of our members, community members. That's the best way for us to ensure these fundamental rights of citizens could be protected and secured through what they're doing through their community. So they want community government as well. None of that was recognized. So that you leave the citizen as an individual fighting directly with the mighty powers of the Tobago House of Assembly and the central government. And as you know, in Jamaica, as no citizen is able to fight the government in that way, and given the dominant presence of the cabinet in the government infrastructure, people back off because they fear for victimization and all of that sort of stuff. And that intimidation factor is writ large in every Caribbean society. So they have not tackled that because they don't think that we should have community-based mechanisms for empowerment. The same is true, by the way, with respect to mechanisms to treat with crime prevention and the management of deviance from childhood and stuff like that. None of that is addressed through the communities. And so there is no real way here in which you could empower the people in the way we have demanded ever since 1970. This report, in fact, in my view, is something close to a waste of government's money and time.
Oh dear. Now, you raised some interesting points about community governance. And, if we have more time, we can delve into that in detail. But it's a concept that is worth noting because we have this concept of government as mainly central government, but local government. And the discussion is mainly that way of thinking. And so the idea of community government and governance is something that would require a little more time than we have this evening. But I just want us to note, because one of the things we want to do in the course is to delve into that concept a little more as we talk about local government. But an issue that is of a lot of interest to Jamaicans is this concept of an executive president. And I know that your report in chapter 3 of the report, it is devoted to this, to the executive. And you have a section in the section 5.5, in case people have it and can look at it quickly. Section 5.51 states that your president should continue to serve as the head of state and the executive branch of government, while the prime minister should remain as head of government. So I want you to clarify for us, does the Trinidad and Tobago have a non-elected executive president?
No, the Trinidad, in fact, let me be straightforward and say, if you really understand what you're talking about and the design of government, Trinidad and Tobago, like Jamaica, like Suriname, like Guyana, and St. Lucia, and so on, has an elected executive president. They just don't call it that. They call that person the prime minister. But if you look at the design of the Constitution, what you see is an elected head of government without fetter and with the capacity to make law and obey law. And that's the constitutional monarch phenomenon across the Caribbean space. So if you look at it that way, we rarely have an executive president, not elected to service the whole country, but elected to service a constituency and to command the reins of government, take charge via the mechanisms for the selection of the prime minister by the president of our country. In your case, by the governor general. Now,
So,
yes.
yeah, go ahead. I just
Yeah.
want to be clear, because you said executive president, but you really meant you have an executive prime minister.
Yes,
that's what you're saying.
That's right. That's exactly right. But in principle, that's the principle of the executive president.
Of the executive president,
that
right.
you could contribute to making law, and you could obey the laws you make.
Yes.
Right? Now, in the case of the US, that executive president is fettered by the oversight of the Congress and the Senate. In Trinidad and Tobago, that same phenomenon has no fetter. So it's a executive body without oversight. That's the central problem every one of us has around the region. It would be worth observing that the language you use when you talk about an executive president is as an elected president in the American sense of one person elected by a popular franchise across the country, popular vote, majority vote across the country, in their case with an electoral college and so on in the middle of that. But you want an elected person to take charge of the executive function of government. And that's
what we have in Ghana and Suriname.
That's what you have in Ghana and Suriname in
and
different
how does
doses.
That differ? Yeah, how does that differ from your president?
Right. In our case, of course, our president is appointed by effectively by the prime minister and the winning party when all is said and done. In the case of Ghana and Suriname, the president is elected directly. But in the case of Ghana, the president is really a king. The president makes law and can control the parliament and can even dismiss the parliament as required. In the case of Suriname, it's not that simple. There is some power in the parliament, the House of Representatives and so on, that you have there. Its fractured nature through proportional representation, however, leaves it in a state where it cannot really fetter the president. I lived there for 4 years, and I lived there as an advisor to the government, inclusive of advising on parliamentary issues and so on. So I could say that in Suriname, it's a little more complicated, but the effect of the design is the same. You can't control the president. So you effectively have an elected head of state in both Ghana and Suriname that really can drive the agenda, both in terms of lawmaking through his allegiances and collaborations in the parliament and so on. And you have to be thoughtful a little bit about that, because Guyana is demonstrating something Jamaica should think about, like Trinidad and Tobago. And that is that if you elect one person who is able to claim national franchise and everybody else has representation at the constituency level, in an authoritarian society, as we've seen in Cuba and Haiti and Dumrep and so on, what you're going to reap is a whirlwind of a kind of king that would take you far away from any dream of citizens having the capacity to limit the behavior and control the behavior of that executive president. And you have to bear in mind that even if you put in place a senatorial design and a House of Representatives design of the kind that you have in the US, you might get something out of that. But remember, the practice of government in that form that the Americans are experiencing now tells you that the early founders, Ben Franklin and them, are making the point. If you can retain a republic of that kind, it will take continuous eternal vigilance, continuous practice of democracy all across the foundations of the society. So that what you see in America is that even at the county level, they have their own government there that provides mechanisms through which citizens can come together to build up the fight up to the state level, up to the city level, right up to the central government level. Those mechanisms, if you don't have them in place in a place like Jamaica, you'll just be buying trouble with anything you call an executive president.
All right, so your report does something very interesting. It provides two options for the election of the president. It suggests that you could directly elect the president through the popular franchise, or you indirectly elect the president through an electoral college. Explain what is being proposed. And in both cases, by the way, and this is important for the Jamaican audience, because in both cases, we're talking about electing a non-executive president.
Right. Well, in principle, what they have here is this. They're not going for the two options. They just laid out the two options.
Two options, right?
One of the options is the option to have a direct election by citizens. Well, let me back up and make a baseline point for you to understand what these guys are proposing. One of the things they've said in their report is that they want this president that is going to be elected in one form or another to be above politics. Now, I know that sentiment is alive and well in Jamaica itself. You want the president to be a person who is not, quote unquote, political, right? Now, in that context, let's take a look at what they are proposing as the design. So first of all, you elect. They reject the idea of a direct election because it would cause the president to become kind of like what I was just warning about, having excessive amounts of power relative to the rest of the elements of the structure of government. So what they want instead is to have a president that is elected by an electoral college. The fundamental structure of that college is all the elected reps in local government, all the elected reps in the Tobago House of Assembly, and all the elected representatives in the National House of Representatives. And they come together and form the fundamental college that would elect the president. Then they want a nominating committee that would effectively come from the Chief Justice and other leading heads of other leading bodies, the Elections and Boundaries Commission and so on, to form a little nomination team. And then this nomination team now would take proposals from a selected set of citizens who would be able to put up their proposed president. And this college would this team would take a look at it, finalize some nominations, and put them forward to the college to make a decision. Now, that process is, of course, going to get you a president at some point, whether directly on the first ballot or on subsequent ballots, runoff ballots, and stuff like that. But the thing that makes trouble for the proposal that they have are the powers that they want this president to have. And when you're talking about the design of government, at some point, your students are going to have to come to face the fact that one of the fundamental elements in the design of any government is the idea that there must be somebody in the government with the responsibility to sign legislation, to turn bills into law. That signature on the legislation is a critical part of all pretensions at democracy. Now, in the proposals of this team, they want the president elected in that form through this electoral college mechanism to assent to legislation or withhold assent. Now, when that president chooses to withhold assent to bills coming from the parliament that is controlled by the prime minister, there is no mechanism in the proposals to treat with that withholding. If the prime minister complains, the president is left with the option to go curry favor with the opposition in order to defeat the prime minister. And remember, this president has a kind of national franchise that nobody else has. So the president set up with this unfettered assent responsibility, unlike in the American case, where when the president signs a bill into law, the Congress and the Senate, and especially the Senate, can override that signature on the part of the president. No such provision is in here. So you're really creating a political president, which is exactly the opposite of what the team says it wants. Now, in addition to that, you have to ask yourself, well, how would anybody compete for the post? You know, we're not going to get a whole list of angelic persons who citizens will automatically know will be good people for the presidency. So people are going to have to campaign, and they don't want politics in the process. But once the presidential candidates have to campaign, political parties are going to be behind them, even though they want to forbid that. People are going to gang up and cook up in order to get their candidate into the presidency if they see any advantage to having a president of the kind that they're talking about. So there is no way they're going to be able to get an executive president in the sense, an elected head of the executive in the way they want it, unless they allow for real politics in the country. The exact opposite of what they are proposing now. So I think this tells you that they have not given proper thought to the whole business of a kind of president who could really be truly above politics. I don't see how that is possible in any case.
And it's actually worth discussion, reading a lot of persons here in Jamaica talking about this executive president. It's worth reading that chapter because it has a lot of details, and the idea of the actual role and responsibility of the president is key. In your case, for example, your president functions pretty much like our governor general, but the governor general, your president can point without consultation on a few matters. And I think to the extent that the political parties, certainly the ruling party, sees a president that has real power in his or her hand, then you're bound to get the politics involved. And it's unless you really give what people are calling ceremonial powers, not real powers, just if you get, unless you do that, you will have a president who is going to be political. So I agree with you there. All right, so we're gonna wrap up now. I have one last final question for you. So please, if you have your own, I'm sure you have your own questions, put them in the chat, or we can unmute you and you can ask your questions. Dwayne will manage that. But my final question is really this. You know, when I read the report, I looked at the report as I've studied other constitutional efforts across the Caribbean. We're seeing something very similar, which is that we've inherited a structure of the Constitution, and by extension, a structure of government that is similar, and when we look back, has really not served us very well. For those, of course, who want to perpetuate the status quo, they'll just say, let's just get the right people in the right place. I've heard that time and time again. But I think some of us are of the view that we have a fundamentally flawed constitutional structure that has to change. So my final question to you is, what would you say is the main problem that all of these constitutions in the Caribbean have to address, in Trinidad, in Jamaica, all of us? What is that fundamental problem that we have to address? And did your report do a good job at addressing it?
The fundamental problem is what we called for in 1970, the absence of power to the people. In other words, we have a constitution here, and you have in Jamaica and all over the region, that effectively sets up the executive to do as it pleases. We set up an executive government with no representatives of the people in place with the capacity and the responsibility to oversee the work of the executive. And we never contemplated, therefore, mechanisms through which citizens can weigh in on the decisions of their elected representatives. It's the absence of those mechanisms that scares the hell out of citizens when it comes to speaking up and participating in the political process and so on, because they're exposed to the overwhelming power of an executive prime minister with no fetter. They have nowhere to turn when that prime minister decides to act in the way he or she chooses to act. That's the fundamental problem, executive authoritarian government. And to deal with that, you have to put specific provisions into the Constitution. First of all, you have to redesign the parliament to allow for enough members, like in the case of Westminster. What we call Westminster has this feature. You have 30, 35 members in the cabinet and 600 and something members in the whole house, 650, I think, somewhere there. So the winning side of the government has 300 members in the current government outside the executive, but they are on the winning side, who could control the cabinet. And remember, that's what happened in Britain in the last year and a half, with starting from Theresa May, come to Boris Johnson, come to Liz Truss, and Richie Sunak paid a price for that. So the presence of a set of people who represent the views of the society and can call in the society to testify on issues, clarify what they want, and so on, is the key mechanism that is really missing from the designs that we have in the region. So they are all making policy and running, cabinet runs the country on half tank, half information tank. They can never know what the people really want. So they're always making mistakes. Every time they make a vote, they please half and they displease another half. And that goes on long enough until people get to the point where I'm sure Jamaica is close to now, of holding their nose and just kicking out the existing government and hope for the best with the next one. They vote against what is there without any fundamental mechanisms to ensure that the ones you bring in you will be able to control them. That's the problem of the design of government across every Caribbean state, whether continental or island. And we need to deal with it by changing the structure of the government properly so that we can grapple with the responsibility of our people to inform their representatives as to what they want, starting from local government and building on, starting from community government and building all the way up to central government. So the voices can be heard at every level.
Yeah, I did say it was the last question, but let me just follow on because that's a theme throughout the whole discussion. This whole idea of cabinet dominance and, not enough opportunities for the people's voice to be heard. But for many of us who've grown up and, cabinet makes a decision, that's the law. I mean, it's final, it's done. How practical, somebody has to make decisions. How practical is it for the people to make these decisions? I mean, what's your take on that? I know when I listen to people have doubts. What does that mean? Are you going to be overrun? It's going to be unwieldy. Everybody wants to have a say and it's going to be unwieldy and so on. What would you say to that kind of perspective?
Well, I think this report by the team points you to one of the reasons you can't rule out properly structured community government. Whatever you define as community. This team wants citizens to have a right they call economic rights. Every citizen must have a set of economic rights. And one way in which they provide for that is that people must have the right to join unions. Okay? Unions would be one type of networking. Well, if you think about the lives of citizens in Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago, or Tobago especially, you would find that citizens, one of the most natural forms of networking citizens could do is to network inside their own communities to deal with issues like support for enterprise, collective enterprise, infrastructure development. All those are economic rights that you will be able to pursue. So you don't only have to pursue economic rights by being a member of the labor market and in the unions and so on, because you have other kinds of economic rights. The best way to provide for those other kinds of rights would be to strengthen the powers of people to collaborate in their communities to pursue community development, which is the backbone of the forms of development we have pursued ever since slavery. So you can't ignore the fact that if you really want to develop Jamaica, you have to activate all the potentials that are lying idle today in the communities of Jamaica. That's where you got your language from, your music from, your foods from. Why continue to discriminate against those parts of your being, right? Because you think they could invent reggae for you, they could invent the language of Jamaica for you, but they're not smart enough to use collective power to pursue development going forward from here. That doesn't make any sense. You can't want it for the unions, union membership, and you don't want it for community membership, for example. It doesn't make rational sense. So it's not, there's nothing infeasible about it. You could build private enterprise, you could build enterprises from households. Why can't you build mechanisms of networking at the community level? There's no reason it can't be done. And nothing in the sky tells you it can't be done. It's just fear of the powers of your society to come alive and minimize the dominance of the central government, and lack of understanding too, I think, that limits our perspectives on that.
And it just, and my final note on that is that it reinforces what has happened since slavery, since that march to independence. Some of us created something out of those Sunday plots. We built a whole civilization. When after 1838, we went into those villages and we created a life for ourselves outside of a dominant plantation system, which we instinctively knew and understood, especially when we were that close to it, was not in our best interest. And so I think today that issue is still on the table. Are we bold enough, brave enough to create a civilization through the innovative ideas of our people, through the habits, the culture, all that we've brought to creating that new civilization, embedded in our communities, in our habits, in our social knowledge, and what will we do with that? And I think this idea of community governance really speaks to that, and how will that feature in cabinet governance? And I think that's really where we are, and that's a struggle. So I have a lot more I could say, and I could talk with you all night. So let me stop at this point. I know Dwayne wants to wrap up, but I hope we have some time for Q&A. And I'm sure others have some questions they want to ask before we wrap up.
Definitely. I see a hand already, Prof, but the discussion really, really rich. So we could do that if you just find the hand up button that works, because then we'll know who to go to first, second, and so on. So Tamara and then Jeanette.
Hi, good night, everybody. Andre and Tamara here. Andre has a question.
Good night. Thank you, Ms. Dr. James, for coming, and it's been incredibly insightful. I hear you keep coming back to community governance and so on and so forth. What we have here in Jamaica is our system where the representative of the constituency is the MP, as a member of parliament. The member of parliament controls the votes of the constituency through various means, including illicit use of public funds for campaign furthering through community development funds from the government. My question is, what do you think, how effective do you think a constitutional amendment or government structural amendment would be that would limit the powers of the MP in the constitution? For example, setting up a separate office, a separate elected office in the constituency. For example, a governor of a constituency and an office of the governor of the constituency that would manage many of the issues that the MP struggles to deal with in the constituency, but that would have separate powers and that the MP could not necessarily control, but that would work in the interest of the people, whereas the MP would represent the voice of the people in parliament. The office, a separate elected office would manage the needs of the community in collaboration with the MP. And by limiting the powers of the MP, you could create a kind of constituency where there would be a centralized voice of the constituency, of the people there for the vision of that community, that would not be subsumed in the main objective of the MP, which is to maintain and/or secure the majority vote of his party. How practical do you think an inclusion of that would be, or what problems do you see in implementing something like that, or do you think that is even a good idea to start with, or to try to promote?
I don't think you need anybody from the central government or even from the local government bodies to control what communities are doing. What you need to do is to set up the communities to look after themselves properly with budget and rights and so on. And then those communities are the ones that must have access to local government bodies that they are collaborating with to get things they want done. And then the local government bodies and the communities collaborate to form and inform the central government as to the things they want a central government to do. So the instructions must go in the opposite direction, not from the central government to the communities by any mechanism at all, but rather from the communities up to the local, up to the central. The information is flowing in that direction. Now, from the point of view of joint decision making, central government may have the right to bring the information they have down to local government and say, well, this is what we think, and that right should exist. That's what my communities are saying. And the central government and the local government must have the right to come to the hearings held by the communities and say, well, this is what we think. But the vote and the right to decide would still lie at the community level. So no member of parliament in the national parliament have any business doing anything, managing any funds or anything like that down in the community level. You just have to empower the communities properly, get them started with their fair share of the national budget, and they will be as creative in using those funds as they have demonstrated for 400 years since the launch of this despicable thing we call slavery. They invented everything: your music, your foods, your clothing, your style of walking, the braggadocio of the Jamaican, all of that was invented in the communities. there is no logic to the idea that they can't go any further. They can't go any further under authoritarian government, in which the central government and the local government could dictate to them. But if you liberate them and empower them, then that's sufficient. So you don't have to be afraid for them. You don't need no member of parliament or any minister to go down in their communities and order them around. And because they will not have the information required to take advantage of the creativity of your people. And you remember that's where jerk came from. They didn't have no central government inventing jerk. No central government invented Pocomania. It's all the communities of Jamaica invented in various forms. Boston come with jerk, Trenchtown come with reggae. Everybody brings something to the mix, but they're not fully empowered. So they cannot drive the development of Jamaica as they would love to. And the evidence we have on the Jamaican economy is straightforward on that. If you don't do well in empowering those communities, Jamaica can never develop. The evidence is as clear as daylight. So don't think about any design that fetters the communities. Think of designs that informs the local government and the central government as to what the communities want to do and how they could facilitate them. And you're in business.
Hello?
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Jeanette?
over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Prof. I have two questions. One is quite brief. The first one is really on the question of, and you've touched on it, but I just wanted to be a little bit more direct in terms of just one particular mechanism by which I have a great interest in how we incentivize parliamentarians to perform. To show up is one start. So I don't want to use, Prof, the loaded words like recall and impeachment, because those are particular mechanisms. But I wanted to find out if in Trinidad there were any discussions, any proposals, whether from within the power base or without, regarding how they can begin to consider incentivizing, I prefer to say it that way than saying holding them to account, but incentivizing our parliamentarians to perform. The other question is a little hard to phrase. So I'm going to count on your intuitive powers, Vanus. But I've been talking with Rosie and I still haven't fully wrapped my head around it. The question, and you've touched on it again, but not so much talking about the executive and its unfettered power, but I want to talk about, I want you to just help me out here with the Prime Minister. I've heard it said in Jamaica a number of times that in theory, what we ended up with is potentially a constitutional dictator. And some people take off the potential. But in trying to understand it, or even more so, trying to explain it to folks, it feels a little distant, because for me, who started paying attention to governance just recently as 2008, I have seen prime ministers who, sure, yeah, they do abuse power, but I've never seen anything that suggests potential constitutional dictator. So my question is, what is the worst case scenario that you can think of? Should a prime minister in either Trinidad or Jamaica decided to abuse that power, just by way of giving us an idea as to what kind of power they really do, wield? Is there anything you can think of in hypothesis that could give us a sense of the extent of this power that's unfettered, that we should be concerned about and we should want to wrap our heads around constraining before somebody comes along and decides to abuse it?
Before you jump in, I wonder if I could just give a quick example of a 1,000% increase in salary.
I hope we could think of worse though, Rosie. that falls into the kind of abuse that, yes, I know we have the capacity for, but that's still not the kind that my nightmares are made of.
But it's written in your constitution in plain language. Cabinet runs the country. That sets up the potential that citizens fear. It has turned into a nightmare in Haiti under Papadoc and in Dumrep under Trujillo and so on. And we're very worried about what's going on elsewhere in the world on this matter of executives that are unfettered. The solution to that problem and the way forward for motivation of your MPs and what have you is to set up the government in a way that divides the labor properly. The cabinet implements the law. That's it. They're not going there primarily to make law. Their primary job is to implement the law, and you make provision for that in the appropriate section of the Constitution. Right now, 69. What is problematic is that there is no structure that allows the non-executive members to make the law.
Okay.
That's what you need. They must go to Parliament and be empowered to make law. That means they have a set of things to do every day they go to work. They have to monitor and investigate what the executive is doing.
Right.
Listen to whistleblowers. They have to investigate matters that bear on the issues, hold the hearings to hear from the local government bodies, the communities, the citizens, and so on, and then form and frame bills to be taken to the plenary, to the floor of the House, on what should be done on particular matters. Hear from the executive bodies, meaning the civil service and all of that. The Prime Minister and his cabinet will bring information from those civil service bodies to complement the process, just as you see it in Britain. But it's the non-executive members that would dominate the process of making a law. That's their day job. And right now, that's not their day job. You have a problem in Jamaica, like in Trinidad and Tobago, in which the cabinet has two jobs: make law, run up and down and represent your constituency. Three jobs actually, and then implement the law. Now, no one set of people could do that efficiently. And the temptation to victimization and all that, which the society fears so much and is immobilized by, is written large into that, because they could make law, they could come in your constituency and do whatever they want. They could implement the law as they please. Yeah, and then they could come and curry favor and finance licky politics and so on. That sort of stuff is just a prescription for the day to come in Jamaica, when you will end up with a papa duck. You don't need anything more than the Constitution you have in your hand to understand that that's a real problem. But also there's something else you have to understand. When one set of people are making decisions on that basis, 90% of the decisions are bad decisions. And Jamaica cannot develop if you don't have sound decisions. So beyond the fact that there could be authoritarian and terrorists in the society, they cannot lead the development of the economy. And Jamaicans want their living standards to grow. So, you look in your constitution, you see it written large there. I think that's the way you have to think about the issue.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I could just add one comment about the incremental change that's taking place. I mean, I think many of us are stunned by the fact that we have a prime minister who cannot tell the country that he's fulfilled his obligations under the law with respect to his declaration. That's now becoming a norm. It's like it's happened for so long, we're pretty much accepting it. It is just incomprehensible that today we can have 8 members of parliament sitting with to be investigated for illicit enrichment, and they're still in parliament. So it's the incremental things that many of us are worried about. And so I just want to make that point, because it doesn't happen overnight. Haiti did not happen overnight. It took a while, it took many years. All right.
Starting from Toussaint.
Yeah. Daniel. I said Daniel.
Everyone. Yes, sorry about that. Thanks for sharing. I apologize for arriving late. Quick question in response to Jeanette's question and to the response by Vanus. When we think of constitutional dictatorship, I was thinking as well along the lines of passing laws instituting legislation that seems to amass power. So in the context of Jamaica, you would support legislation that extends the time of the DPP that suits your favor. You will amend aspects of the Constitution utilizing your majority that speaks to your favor. You look at the laws as they are and you determine what laws you want to enforce or what you want to weaken with a view that it strengthens your position. So to my mind, when I thought about it being a constitutional dictatorship, it tells me that we don't have the power to control not just the making of laws or what becomes law, but even when elections are called, because they're called at the whim and fancy of the leader who, if we read the tea leaves, if all the backbenchers and all the supporters for the Jamaica Labour Party as they currently are wants to remain in power, they'll never challenge the Prime Minister, and he's at liberty to do and say as he pleases to ensure that his party remains in power. My assessment is that that is what you would look at as a constitutional democracy or dictatorship. If I am correct, or I perhaps should say, am I correct in looking at those examples and scenarios as increments of or examples of constitutional dictatorship, which can get to the point where you have an enforced or you have a prime minister who is irremovable because of the incremental legislation that secures his power. Is that the assessment that we could look at to say these are examples of constitutional dictatorship as presumed by the constitutions of the Commonwealth Caribbean, of many of the Commonwealth Caribbean constitutions?
Yeah, I think you could make the assessment with those kinds of examples, and there are thousands of them. So you're quite right. It's not only incremental in the way that that you are describing or Prof. Hamilton is describing. The main concern you have to have is that citizens feel disenfranchised. They only could watch when things are happening and wait until election come. So they need to do things every day to improve their lives, and they are limited in what they can do because of that design. And so if you're talking about the long-term future of Jamaica, it will take you 10,000 years to develop the economy and the society because your citizens, where all the creativity and all of those things are lodged, are located really, because they are disenfranchised by what you're describing, all of these mechanisms of abuse and so on. That has the flip side of preventing citizens from feeling liberated and not full of fear of the government to do the things they really need to do where they live every day. So you're right. I mean, you can use those kinds of examples, but the deep-seated problem Jamaica has, like Trinidad and Tobago, is that you have a people who are not empowered to liberate themselves from all forms of the legacies of slavery and strict indenture.
Thank you.
And that is why the community empowerment thing is such a big thing and so clear and evident in the data. What we're seeing in the Jamaica data, the audience, is that the momentum for development that is embedded in the sector of the economy created by these people, these communities, is very low. If we don't do something to allow them to undertake investment that we traditionally call community development investment, if we don't liberate them to do that, the heart of your economy remains locked out of the thrust and drive, the investments that you need to undertake, to do innovations, to do the productivity increases you need, and so on. So you're paying two kinds of prices. You're not developing as an economy. None of the Caribbean economies are. You're not developing as an economy. And your people are under the millstone of an authoritarian government every day that keeps that firmly in place. Now, how are you going to get out of that? you have to come up with devices to educate the society that the time has come to change the structure of government. It is the biggest barrier to the development of the Jamaican economy and society.
Oh, the frustration, many people leave.
Absolutely. And that's
And
right.
we,
Look, don't
and we
discount
lose
the
our best
role of that
assets.
frustration. Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly right. A big part of the brain drain is that people feel helpless facing the power of the central government. They want things done differently. Today on the road, a school supervisor came up to me and said, we listened to your session and we are coming to you to help us. This is a living, active school supervisor. We need to hear how these things are linked to development of the education system. And we can't go to the government. We can't speak out in public. So we're coming to you to hold one of these sessions that you hold and address the needs of the education sector first. Why should we run a society in which big people with masters and PhDs scared to talk about issues? That's a price you're paying for the constitutional design you are working.
Yeah, and especially young people have been really frustrated.
So they pack
So
their bags and leave,
absolutely,
voting
absolutely.
with their feet as it.
Yeah. Dwayne,
Yeah, Prof, there's
there,
a comment in the chat from Donna Matis. She's saying, hi, everyone. Would you consider the maroon style community rule a sort of template for this notion of community self-government? Could we learn anything from them? Yep. Any comments?
Exactly right. The maroon community in Maroon Tongue and so is a good example of how you have to think of all the communities in Jamaica, from Trenchtown all the way to all of them. You have to think of them just like you think of the communities. They must be able to pursue self-determination and fit into the country. We have not bothered to work out how the maroon communities would fit properly to the country, but we could work it out easily. What you need is to see that local government is a network of communities in the locality. And you provide proper mechanisms through which those localities can harness the powers of the local government to support what they're doing. The local government has no reason for existence other than as a mechanism to facilitate community development. And so that would be true for the maroon communities and for any other community inside the locality. So that's the right angle of thought. And you take it all the way. Could you imagine what would happen to reggae and tourism in Trenchtown if they had their own fair budget and the power to develop the economic might of Trenchtown, given its heritage and its innovativeness and so on? I mean, what would happen to reggae music? The musicians are investing in the innovation every year without any serious support from anybody. But if they had their powers in their communities, they would have an injection of investment and all sorts of things to carry on what they're doing. And the musicians have proven it's possible. Why are we waiting? We're waiting because of the millstone of authoritarian government around our necks, and we need to change that design. So you're right. The Maroon Tongue example is a good example, and you'll be solving a critical historical problem at the same time in finding a proper way to give them a real place in the society that the British denied them and that you continue to deny them because you're not paying any mind to your communities.
yeah. And sometimes, we use a lot of the rhetoric that's around participatory governance and so on. But when you see what's actually happening, you know that, we haven't changed the structure much. You can look, actually, I'm looking right now on local government website on its development mission and vision. I was doing some research recently and I saw it and I said, wow, I mean, here's a local government. This is central government domination of local government, having a vision of autonomous system of local governance. which is participatory. Now, how do you put such a vision in place when there's so much central control? So there's a lot to do. And I think, to be fair to many of us, we all have that dream of, empowering communities, but how exactly to do it? I think there's a lot of work to be done. But there's a lot of lessons we can learn from what has happened in the past and what we've been able to do, on our own as a people. So, all right, I know we could go on all night, so let me stop at this point. And I want to just thank Professor James, has always been supportive of our effort in the Institute of Law and Economics, continue to bring a very rich perspective of legal and economic perspective. And I think we are of the view in the Institute of Law and Economics that this discussion of the Constitution cannot be seen devoid of our economic development path. And so both in the course and in the work that we do, we try to bring the two perspectives together. So you constantly hear Professor James talking about the models that actually show that you need this kind of joined up decision-making process to get better outcomes. And, at another time, in another place, we can have those kinds of detailed discussions from an economic perspective. But tonight we were just talking around the Constitution and really reflecting on your report. And I want to thank you so much, Vanus, for the rich insights. I think it has deepened our understanding of not only what's happening in Trinidad, but certainly what we're trying to do here as well. So thank you very much.
Prof. Hamilton, can I thank you and Dwayne and the entire community here, Judith and so on, Jeanette and so on, for holding this kind of conversation. It's long overdue in the Caribbean, and Jamaica, as always, takes the lead in holding them as a matter of scholarship. So I am extremely impressed by what you all are doing, and I want to thank you on behalf of all the rest of us who live in the Caribbean.
Thank you.
Excellent. Really great stuff, Prof. Hamilton, Prof. James, and again, echoed thanks. Want to just remind persons that this discussion here is a build-up to cohort 2 that we are looking to embark on. And for those who weren't here earlier, I'm just going to bring it up on screen really quick. On the 17th of September, we're looking to jump into our first module. So between now and then, we're going to be sending out some more communication as it relates to more content as it relates to the different course modules that we'll be going through and just what to expect throughout the course. But September 17th is when we're looking to kickstart it. We're looking at a face-to-face means of having the first course, but we'll keep you posted on that. The link to join the cohort is in the chat, and I'll repost it in a quick second, just in case it came in afterwards. And then that will go through to the 15th of October. We'll be having some of the different sessions, looking at a number of different topics: introduction to democracy and development, understanding democracy and our roles and responsibility, government, governance, and the Constitution. And then we end with constitutional reform and the Jamaican Republic. And so rich insights in each of those modules. And if you weren't a part of the first cohort, you certainly want to make sure that you are in on this one as well. That's where we will put our wrap on things for this evening. Thank you so much for choosing to come and join us and stay with us. I was looking at the numbers throughout. The numbers remain quite steady. So really want to say thanks to all of you who joined this call. We recorded, and so we will send a link with everyone's permission, just to, for those who weren't able to come on, even though they're registered, so that they can go back and rewatch and hear some of what Prof. James and Prof. Hamilton said. Thanks again, take care, and all the very best. We'll be in touch.
Bye. Thanks, Rosie. Thanks, Vanus.
Take good care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you very much.